Hi, this is Dr. Lillian McEnery, and I am here with you giving you an overview of the constructed response example and practice for the Science of Teaching Reading test. The PowerPoint is meant to be self-paced. You can go through it at your leisure and do the different exercises a little bit at a time. I want to give you a little bit of background on the Science of Teaching Reading test. It's comprised of 90 selected response items. They'll have single question items as well as one constructed response item. It is about a 4-hour and 45-minute testing time for the test, so you do have ample time to take the test. The people required to take the test are the early childhood EC through grade 3, the core subjects with Science of Teaching Reading early childhood through grade 6, the core subjects with Science of Teaching Reading grades 4 through 8, the English Language Arts and Reading with Science of Teaching Reading grades 4 through 8, and the English Language Arts and Reading Social Studies with Science of Teaching Reading grades 4 through 8. So the test will be administered for the very first time on January 1st, 2021. I want to start by saying that your coursework at UHCL has really prepared you well for this exam. You've really been given a pretty deep knowledge well of instructional strategies and activities, TExES, and assessment tools for looking at foundational reading practices. We've also prepared you for building that bridge between collecting data on a particular student and then coming up with instructional strategies that address what the data shows you. This test does allow you, and we encourage you to really approach things when you're given data on a student to look first for their strengths in terms of the data that you're given, and then use those strengths to really help the student in areas of need. So you have this. Do not stress. So the framework and weighting of the test covers 4 domains. It looks at reading pedagogy, ways of teaching reading. It looks at reading development and foundational skills. So it looks at things like phonemic awareness. It looks at phonics. It looks at the different types of things that have to be in place for students to really be proficient readers. It also looks at reading development, comprehension, and it looks at an analysis and response where you are going to be required to respond to particular scenarios and given data on one particular student. On this slide are the domains that are covered, and it breaks it down a little bit more. So you might be thinking, well, what is meant by foundational skills and what is meant when they say comprehension? So this chart helps to break it down for you. I want you to notice that domain 2, the reading development piece, looking at phonics and oral language and phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, and reading fluency really do comprise a large part of the test at 43%.
So for this sample assignment, you're going to use the information in the exhibits to complete the assignment that follows. And this is modeled after the TEA example constructed response. So this one in particular focuses on a 5th grade student named Alyssa. Her primary language is English. The assessment data in the exhibits was collected using the Developmental Reading Assessment, or the DRA2, during the first 6 weeks of the school year. And the DRA2 is a pretty common assessment in grades 4 through 8 in TExES. So you are going to use your knowledge of reading pedagogy and developmental progression of foundational reading skills and reading comprehension, and your knowledge of the TExES, to analyze the information provided and write a response that is 400 to 600 words. And in those 400 to 600 words, you'll be completing the following bullets. And you can see I've kind of grouped some of the bullets because they go together. So the first two bullets are about foundational reading skills. So you're going to identify a significant need there, and then you're going to cite specific evidence from the exhibits, particularly the oral reading fluency assessment and the fluency rubric to support your analysis. And then you will also describe one appropriate effective instructional strategy or activity that would address the student's needs you identified and help them to achieve relevant grade level standards. In the next section, you would identify one significant need the student demonstrates in relation to reading comprehension. And this is going to be in the Comprehension Assessment. That'll be Exhibit 2, you'll see. And then you'll describe one appropriate or effective instructional strategy that would address that and help that student achieve grade level standards. And then in the end, you'll explain why each of the instructional strategies or activities you described would be effective in addressing the needs you identified and in helping the student achieve grade level reading standards as described in the TExES for ELA.
So the sample constructed response question really does require that you write an essay of sorts. Now, when I say essay, I don't mean like 4 or 5 paragraphs, but you do need to have 2 or 3 paragraphs that really cover what you see as strengths for the student and what need you see, and then how you would address the need. So you will need to conform to the conventions of standard English. It should be written in your words and your original work and not copied or paraphrased from some other work. The exhibits for the constructed response question, and the exhibits are the data sources that you're going to have, are going to be in a tabbed format on the computer administered test. So you'll move along the tabs to reveal the different data sources that they are giving you to consider as you come up with ideas for what the child's needs are and what kind of instructional strategies you would plan for that child. An on-screen answer box will be provided during the test, and that's where you'll type your response. It does allow for some editing of your response as well, and then there's a word counter that gives you the word count as you enter text into the box. So one suggested approach with this is for you to really come up with a little table after you read each data source, each exhibit. And you can do it on scratch paper. And what you're going to do is you're going to number the exhibit and then read over it a couple of times, find out what the student's strengths are as you read over it, and then identify one need that the student has based on that data or exhibit. And then you'll come up with one idea for what kind of instructional recommendations you would have, and then you would come up in general the TExES that would be addressed. So in this section, on the TExES section, it's often enough to say fluency or developing comprehension skills or developing inferential comprehension skills. So you can be very general in that particular area. You don't have to know the number or, the Roman numeral that goes beside it. Just being general is fine.
So for this constructed response question, we provided a couple of exhibits for you for this 5th grade student. You're going to be looking at Exhibit 1, which is an oral reading fluency and a fluency rubric, and Exhibit 2, which is a comprehension assessment. And you'll notice the comprehension assessment has 4 different pages to it, so it's a longer exhibit. And as mentioned before, you will be looking at students' strengths, because we always want to start with what they're doing well, right? You're going to look at their needs, what instructional recommendations can help those needs and help students to reach the grade level TExES that they are expected to reach.
So on the following 2 slides, some of the scoring criteria is listed because whenever we go into a task such as this, it's important to recognize realize, be aware of how you're being assessed so that you can more carefully and more intentionally address what is being expected of you. So in this first rubric, you can see that they're looking at performance characteristics. So they're looking at whether you've completed the task, whether you've responded to each piece that they are asking of you, that you've applied content in your answer, so that you've addressed the TExES, so that you've actually named something that the student has as a gap in his or her learning. And then the kind of support that you provide in your answer is also important. You can see that a 4 really is going to ask you for fully addressing all parts of the assignment, that you haven't left a certain piece off, that you have an application of the relevant content knowledge and skills, and that you have some evidence, strong evidence, when you make a statement about something and you describe how the instructional strategy might work. So I'm an optimist, so we're only going to go over 4s because I predict that all of you are going to do really well on this part of the test especially. So as you're working along with this PowerPoint, you're going to need just some paper and pen and pencil. It would help to have your TExES vertical alignment chart with you, and then the exhibits 1, 2, 3, and 4 are being provided for you within the PowerPoint. If I were you, one thing I would do is really memorize these TExES strands, because if all else fails, you can think back to one of these and include that in the TExES column. So here I have an example of a chart that you might do. You'll do this 4 times because you have 4 pieces of data that are going to be presented to you. So one of the first things I would do if I were you is before attempting your response, I would read the directions over several times and then look back over your charts and jot down notes according to the different pieces of data that you are provided. Remember that you want to identify one significant need that the student demonstrates related to foundational reading skills. So you may have a piece that has 2 or 3 needs exemplified. Be careful to just choose one. You're only being asked to choose one in the test. So that will allow you to really hone in on that and give specific evidence on that.
So now it's time for some guided practice. So as was mentioned earlier, this assignment focuses on a 5th grade student. Her name is Alyssa. Her primary language is English. The assessment data and the exhibits that are going to be provided for you are from the Developmental Reading Assessment, the DRE2, and they were taken during the first 6 weeks of the school year.
So in preparation for answering the prompt, I would think back over things you've learned in terms of study skills in general. So you might want to underline key things that you need to focus on, make notes to yourself, make your chart, and then make sure that you've looked at all of the different exhibits before you start. So you're going to want to create and fill out a chart for each of the exhibits. You can do it on scratch paper, and you could even practice writing a response of your own as you move through this PowerPoint.
So for Exhibit 1, this is an oral reading fluency assessment and the fluency rubric that the teacher would fill out after the assessment. So you can see that this is for Alyssa. It was administered at the beginning of the year. She's in 5th grade. You can see that there is a passage that she read. Because of the DRE2 instructions and because of the grade level that Alyssa is in, she was able to choose from a couple of passages, and she chose Who Are Storm Chasers to read. So while Alyssa was reading out loud to her teacher did 2 things. First, she used the passage that you see here to mark any miscues that Alyssa made while reading. And you can see that if Alyssa corrected a miscue, there's a C next to it that's circled. And you can see that on the second page. There's one of those. If there's no circled C, then that means that that's a miscue that Alyssa made while she was reading. The other thing the teacher did was timed Alyssa in her reading, because remember, part of fluency is how many words per minute. And so you can see the word count was 245 words. And on the second page, you can see that it took Alyssa 2 minutes and 3 seconds. And that would put her at an independent reading level. That's what that is. That chart, there's intervention, instruction, independent, and advanced. So she could read this passage at an independent reading level. And then you can look at the number of miscues, and that would tell you the percent of accuracy. So she was at a 97% of accuracy for this passage. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that she could use instruction on. And the last thing you're going to see is the oral reading fluency rubric that the teacher used after Alyssa read the passage. And it just gives you a little bit more information about Alyssa's fluency.
So you would fill out your chart. So the exhibit number would be 1. You would look at student strengths. What one need do you see? And one strategy that would go under instructional recommendations, and a TEK that would align with that.
So here's an example of some things that I would have written for Exhibit 1, her oral reading fluency and the fluency rubric. So for strengths, Alyssa read many multisyllabic words. Some of them her phrasing was not perfect on. You could see the line in photographer, but she read through those words. Many of her substituted words didn't really change the meaning of the sentences she was reading. She could still understand the general meaning of it. And Alyssa had good expression, and she emphasized key words. Now, as far as needs, Alyssa made several substitutions where she did not work through the word to the ending, which is why, so she didn't go back and reread it or work through the entire word. She kind of looked at the word and then moved on. And we also, with Alyssa, I think can still work on phrasing of longer phrases. And so an instructional recommendation for Alyssa would be to help her look through words to monitor her word choice. So help her read through the entire word, maybe help her slow down a little bit to monitor her word choice, because she's reading the author's words, but at the same time, what she's saying out loud is part of her fluency, right? And the TEKS that's connected to is using appropriate fluency when reading a grade level text. So on this slide, you can see I've taken the needs and instruction and TEKS from the chart on slide 21, and I've kind of put it together and written more than just what I put in that chart. So based on the oral reading fluency, Alyssa read the passage with good expression and phrasing. You could see that in my student strengths. She emphasized the correct words and phrases at the correct times. You saw that in my list too. However, to better her accuracy when reading, because she was at a 97% accuracy rate, but that doesn't mean it was perfect, right? Alyssa does need some support when it comes to miscues and self-correction. Alyssa did not always self-correct her miscues, and these many times were due to not working through to the end of the word. For example, she substituted angle for angel and spent for spends. Alyssa could benefit from a support in reading from support in reading. So those were my specific examples that I provided to show the instruction I am recommending. And so here is the instruction. Alyssa could benefit from a support in reading through to the end of words to monitor her word choice. In small groups or one-on-one, Alyssa would benefit from slowing down when reading and reading more carefully to the end of each word to self-correct her miscues. And then I wanted to add another instructional strategy that could be used with Alyssa would be for her to look through words to monitor her word choices. This could also be done in small group or during a reading conference. This connects to the fluency TEK because self-correction in reading to the end of words is needed for successful fluent reading. So you can see that I started with her strengths, I went to her needs, I gave specific examples, and then I talked about what instruction I would provide for Alyssa. So you'll see on this slide and the next one, 23 and 24, they're all part of Exhibit 2, which is the Comprehension Assessment. So this assessment was administered one-to-one. The teacher asked Alyssa to pause and answer the prediction section after reading the beginning of the passage. And then she asked Alyssa to write a summary after Alyssa read the entire passage. And so that's what you'll see on this slide. On this slide, you will see a continuation of the comprehension assessment. So Alyssa answered the literal comprehension and interpretation sections after reading the passage. She did a lot of this on her own. The teacher guided her through it, but she was able to read the questions and answer them. Then she answered the reflection questions and the metacognitive awareness section after reading. So you can see that the DRA is hitting different pieces and levels of comprehension. And these are all things that you can pull out strengths and needs when it comes to thinking about what instruction Alyssa would need.
So you would make your chart based on Exhibit 2 and talk about Julia's strengths, one need that she has, and one instructional recommendation that you have for her based on that need.
So for the comprehension assessment, I listed under strengths. And so when I listed them, I tried to put things together that I could put together. I didn't list every tiny detail, but kind of the overarching strengths and needs. So for strengths, Alyssa has several reasonable questions before reading. She made 2 reasonable predictions, and this shows that she has a purpose for reading and a basis for self-monitoring when she's reading. Another strength is that she uses her own language when she constructs a summary. Another one is that in the interpretation, Alyssa demonstrates an understanding of an important text implication. So she's thinking deeper into the text and what the implications are. And then lastly, based on her answers, this was in the literal comprehension piece, I think, or the reflection, but she uses headings and text when she's reading to understand the reading better. So then when it comes to needs, so her summary was good, but it was only partial. It didn't hit all of the supporting details, and it didn't really go over the bigger ideas in the passage. And then for the literal comprehension section, Alyssa only partially answered the prompt, and her answers were very general. And then her reflection could have been more thoughtful. And so we can see that Alyssa is understanding what she's reading, but she's not really going a lot deeper in her thoughts and deeper into the passage. And so for instruction, I would want to help her grasp the overall intent of the passage and add more supporting information. And the TEKS that are connected to that would be the identifying key idea TEKS and the comprehension strand. And then for the literal comprehension and the partially answered prompt, I would want to instruct her on how to use keywords and ideas to be more specific in her responses, dig a little deeper, get more details in there. And I think that also connects to the identifying key ideas TEKS, and then the response TEK that is about using newly acquired vocabulary, because that's where those key ideas come in. And then the last one, so for her more thoughtful reflection, I think she could use some instruction on extending her ideas when writing. And specifically for this one, extending her ideas when she's writing about what she's reading. And so this would be under the response skills strand to discuss specific ideas in the text that are important to the meaning. So putting all of that together, and you can see that it could be longer, but I also was able to condense it a little bit, so you can kind of do that depending on your word count and where you are in your answer. So based on the comprehension section of the DRA2, Alyssa was successful at using text features to comprehend the passage and know what was coming next. And notice that I used text features instead of headings. You could easily use either one, but it shows that I know my technical language when it comes to reading comprehension. Alyssa also shows purpose in her reading by asking reasonable questions and making reasonable predictions before reading. When constructing a summary, Alyssa used her own language to write it. And so now I'm going to go into her needs and what she what she would need instructionally. So instructionally, Alyssa would benefit from instruction that would help her grasp the overall intent of a passage and add more supporting details from each section of a text into her summaries. She would also benefit from looking at keywords and details to be more specific in her thinking and writing about a passage. And both of these are connected to and support the key details TExES in the comprehension strand. Notice that to save some words, I connected both of those to the TExES at the same time. And then lastly, Alyssa would then benefit from instruction in extending her ideas when writing about her reading and connecting these to the meaning of a text in her reading responses. So you can see I talked about her strengths, her needs, and then instructionally how the teacher could meet those needs.
So in closing, remember you have all the tools necessary to be successful on this test. It's our hope that going through these exercises that we're providing through our PowerPoints, that you'll feel more prepared for the constructed response. On the day of the exam, you've got this. You just need to take a deep breath, carefully map out your possible responses, check over your work, maximize your tools of writing skills, and envision yourself walking across the stage, graduating, and setting up your first classroom. Thanks for being with us today.